It's the Massacre first, isn't it?
Massacre first.
And remember, Jason, this is 1572 and it's a historical. It's not contemporary.
That's okay. I'm aware of it being a historical. I sat through all 4 of the recall episodes.
Oh, God. If the words great and script concurrently come out of you, Jason, I'm going to leave this meeting. I'm going to be gone.
Can I say I am not going to be saying the words great script when it comes to the Massacre? Well, at least I'm not eating. There's got to be a bonus there, isn't
You've
there?
literally just finished your McDonald's. You were eating.
Yeah, but not on screen.
This is season 3, part 3 of 5. Oh, it's a long one. I am Paul or P-Bal, and I am joined. No, I'm not joined by. Like us, subscribe, and share us. Write things below. Let's do that first. I'm joined by.
I thought you were going to say you're on your own. It's like, no, it's just a solo performance this week. Hi, it's James.
And hello, it's Jason.
I mean, I could do the impersonations. I mean, we could just sort of. I could give it. I could give it a go.
Oh.
Although, hang on. Why are you not cosplaying as a Huguenot?
Well, I did consider it, but I decided that after last week, I'm still finding white paint everywhere. So I'm just like, no, I'm going to do it back into my normal self this week.
Oh, and there was me. I was expecting you to turn up as the Abbot of Amboise there.
I think that the least we could have expected was a slaughtered Huguenot, to be honest with you, and I'm a little bit disappointed here. This could have been our moment. Okay, so shall I do a recap of where we're at? Shall I? Okay, well, currently we've done 4 stories so far. In last position is Galaxy 4 on 13.5, followed by Mission to the Unknown on 20.5. Mythmakers is in second position on 21, and our current leader is the Daleks Master Plan on 24. Thanks to a very strange 10 from James.
I really enjoyed it.
I know, you were just celebrating your first recon. Damn it!
That's got to be worth a 10.
I've done a recon. I'm giving it a 10. I'm moving on. That's it.
Like, I've done it. I'm not doing any more of them. They can all have 2 from now on. I'm not watching any more of that.
I'm back to the dark web for all of my knowledge.
Least said. So the first story we are looking at today is the Massacre of St.Bartholomew's Eve. Yeah, I'm not shortening this. We're not calling it the Massacre. We'll give it the whole thing here. Viewers at home might be pleased to notice that there's been a return here.
Hey! We love the targets.
It's a WH Allen hardback. It's about 30 quid difference there, mate.
That is the truth. There is about 30 quid's worth of difference there, but they are a thing of beauty, all the hardbacks for sure.
Thanks to Simeon for selling me this last week. Yeah, quite. It's a quick debut for this to come round. Anyway, who has got an introduction? And I'm going to check whether it starts the TARDIS lands in Paris on the 19th of August, 1572.
So, Jason, you'll remember this actually happening. So, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I was in Paris in that year. That's right. Yeah.
Sightseeing.
No, getting drunk. He was getting drunk in the streets. Like, what are all these people with swords about for?
Oh, they did a very nice red wine back there in 1572. That's all I got to say on it.
It's going to be a short video, isn't it? So who has got a lovely introduction for us on this story? Oh, come on. If you take it in turns, there's only 2 stories here.
I know.
Well, I'll start us off on it, but I am going to have to just make the reference of the fact that we're in Paris in the year 1572. But this is back to Paris and back to a very dark historical story, and one that's missing the recent injections, I think, of humor that were put into some of the historicals in the last season, because this is one dark, horrible story. And you know the ending, because the ending's set in stone. And it's not an easy watch when you come through it for a number of reasons. It's a little bit ploddy, and actually, I do think this might be one that I would look at differently if we had visuals for it, because we've got such a lack of anything. And having watched the recon for this one, to try and really get into the sort of reading of it, and this isn't one I've watched many times by any stretch. But even the recon struggles to lift this story because there's just so little visual material there. And I think this is one, a bit like the Mythmakers, where I think if we had it, we were able to appreciate it probably, then I think I should say, feeling about the story would be probably a little bit higher. But this suffers a little bit for me from what the Reign of Terror suffered with. Again, another historical set in Paris, whereas it's just too dark. And the subject matter for kids' TV in 1965, this is some serious thing going on here. And particularly when you get into the closing scenes, before we get Hartnell's piece in the TARDIS, I mean, that's grim. So yeah, it's an interesting idea. I think take us to another period in French history, that's great, but it needs a lift here, and I'm not sure why.
What sort of a lift do you think it needs?
Well, I think it needs like the other. I think it needs like some of the other historicals. It just needed a little something, just a lift of maybe just a couple of humorous scenes, or something to, just something to lighten the mood from scene to scene at some point. I said this about the Reign of Terror when we watched that. It suffers because it really is just pure historical, and it's a retelling of that part of with the Doctor and co involved in it. And there's no lightness in amongst the dark. And this is exactly the same thing for me. There isn't any light and shade in this story. It is just too dark. So, I said when we watched the Romans that I felt that perhaps the comedy had been dialed up a little bit too much in that one. But you can see where adding humor into some of the historicals they did in season 2 certainly helps to just give the story a little bit of movement. But this is just too dark.
I think. Oh, go on.
No.
I was going to say, I think because it is just the Doctor and Stephen, you don't have the luxury of having where you might have a few more characters, where you could have one that's on a lighter path, if you like, because this story is a lot. And we talked about Peter's performance and Stephen's coming to the fore in Dalek's master plan, but here you see it really played out because the Doctor effectively goes missing, just sort of says, oh, I'm off to go and see the apothecary, and just goes and leaves Stephen in this very sort of dangerous, like you say, dark time of history, not really aware of exactly what was going on and what the historical significance of where they were is. You get Hartnell playing two characters. So you get him playing the Doctor, but you also get him playing really the main villain, and the two never meet. It's not like Troughton, where he came to face to face with himself, with his doppelganger. In this instance, you don't get that, and Hartnell's not there for episode 2 either. It's only in a pre-filmed sequence that he plays the abbot. So you have Stephen taking a large chunk of this on his own. So you don't necessarily have that the luxury of having another companion who's not, like the Romans. You had 3 companions, and you could have a little bit of fun with what was happening with some of them. You don't really have that luxury here. And when you sort of, the aspects I like, actually, because it reminded me of the David Tennant and Donna, the Pompey one, where she was like, well, you've got to save the family, and he's like, no, I can't interfere with established history. And as soon as, when you get to episode 3 and the Doctor reappears properly and they say, where are we? And he goes, right, we're leaving. It's just like, we can't interfere with this history. We're going to head off. And at the end of Dalek's Masterplan, you saw Stephen quite upset about the loss of the companions, you know, because of the number of people that had died. And again here you see Stephen saying, well, that's it, I've had enough, I don't want to travel with you anymore, you know, this is wrong, you should have saved people, you know. And so I think, although it is, I mean, I put gritty and grim because that's pretty much how it comes across. There is no real light to it. It is just, this is what's going to happen. It's fixed in time. We can't really change it. I mean, there is a tiny little sliver of light in the fact that later on you find out that Anne survived, and you know, Dodo walks in. But apart from that, it's like, we've thrown you into this historical story, but you can't actually do anything about it. It's all going to happen. It's all going to play out. You know, thousands of people are going to be murdered over this period of time. So yeah, it is an odd one, because at the end there's no payoff for it. There's no sort of like, we've made a difference, or, you know, it is quite, like I say, it's quite gritty but grim. I agree there needed to be something slightly lighter, but does that then take away from the historical significance of the event that was taking place? Don't know.
I don't think you can come at a story called The Massacre and hope that there's going to be a few jokes along the way, to be honest with you. I think it's the difference, I guess, here against a lot of other Doctor Who historical. So say the Aztecs. The Aztecs is generically, it takes place, you know, in a period of history, but it's a story that takes place at a period in history. The Romans is a story that takes place at a, you know, obviously the burning of you know, but the sort of, as a rule, it's a story made around and put in that period. Whereas this is the telling of a historical event. It's not a story. There isn't a story about, you know, Doctor Who meeting someone that's done something, and it's not something that's happening concurrently with the historical event. It is the story of the historical event. So to that end, you can't play with it in the same way. If it was set and that they heard this was happening in Paris, or you know, it would be, there'd be more leeway, I guess. You can't have an attempted assassination. You can't have a mass slaughter of people and lighten it, because it's a horrible part of history. But it's also, I guess, within that kind of remit of the Doctor Who educational thing. I mean, the interesting thing is there's multiple things with this, because this was Donald Tosh's absolute favourite. He was so eager to see this back, and he was, you know, so enthusiastic about it, because he rewrote so much of it, and it's sort of his story. Because this is the third go on John Lucarotti getting another script in, and they kept changing his period, and he was meant to be doing a Viking one and all this sort of stuff. And so they settled on this, and then Donald wasn't happy with it, and you know, so it is his thing, and he rewrote it because he wanted it to be accurate. He wanted the story that was told on screen to be accurate. It's one of those different things, isn't it? In far as, does that work as Doctor Who, or does it work as a drama? And are the two things slightly different to each other? They should be sort of the same thing, but it is a slightly different thing. I know, I mean, rating-wise, the kids, I mean, February 66 is whatever. From the first episode at 8 million, it dropped. It lost 2 million consecutively for the rest of the run, and then sort of picks up again with the arc. So obviously it was a bit heavy for the kids, because it's not a light adventure, is it? There's not a sort of cheeky run around with the Daleks, and you know, it isn't a drama. But then sort of 50 to 60 years on, 60 years nearly enough now, isn't it? Watching it or not watching it, it's a drama, and it's a really good drama. And I think, can we appreciate it more now as a really good piece of drama than we could if we were watching it in 1966 as kids watching at 5 o'clock for a Doctor Who adventure? Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and the BBC are good at making those kind of historical, and we've talked about this with other stories. The BBC are very good at making historical dramas. They're very good at telling those stories, and we have seen, you know, we do see that in early Doctor Who. They become less, I mean, you start to move into the pseudo historicals later on, where there's some villain or alien that's influencing the historical situation. And I guess some of the ones that we've talked about already in previous reviews, some work better than others. I think with this one, there is very little material change that the characters make. It's kind of they don't really interact with a great deal of characters in the story. The idea that the Doctor Hartnell is the abbot as well, that's historically true. There was a couple of years beforehand, there was a guy who impersonated the abbot before the massacre. So again, that's something that actually happened, which has been woven into this story. The rest is pretty much as it was, and it doesn't flinch away from that. And I guess in some ways that's great, because you're right, the Doctor Who was meant to be educational and say this is what happened, and it doesn't shy away from that. I just think, like you say, for a kids show or family show, it's quite a dark topic to be viewing for 4 weeks.
And I would agree with that. And I think you're right. You look at this as a piece of drama, and although I've said this is quite dark and it's quite heavy going, I think I agree. It's quite thought provoking, particularly when you get to those sort of closing scenes. And I'm not sure if it played out like this on the televised version, but obviously you get these sort of line art drawings that have been up as the captions at the start of each episode, and the captions sort of take you through the massacre as it sort of plays out. And this isn't a period of history that I'm too familiar with. So I sat there and actually it was quite, I thought, wow, okay, gee, that really was quite a dramatic event in the period of history that we, and we've led up to. And I you're right, you're not going to put a load of comedy into this. And I know I've said I wanted light and dark in it potentially, but it is just, it is serious, and it stands very well actually as a piece of drama today. I can see why, in 1966, probably the viewing public didn't quite grasp onto it because it wasn't Monster of the Week, etc. It is just hard, and it is gritty, as you say, James. So for me, it's very interesting rewatching it. I've only probably ever seen the recon once before, so to sit down and watch it again as part of this sort of review that we're doing has given me an opportunity, I think, to reappraise this story. I am actually really, it's moved right up my list of stories I think I would actually want back in the archive, because I really actually would like to see this one live, if you like.
I mean, one of the clever plots that comes in, and it isn't necessarily part of the massacre sort of as a historical story, is Stephen believing that the abbot is the Doctor pretending to be the abbot, and then when the abbot's killed, he thinks that the Doctor's been, and the sort of permutations of what would happen, because that's quite a nice part of that, because that's having not so long ago done the sort of season 11 thing where every week poor old Sarah Jane has to believe Doctor Who's been killed by something quite unlikely. The fact that he's then like, crikey, why is he pretending to be the abbot? It's got to be him because he looks just like him, and then he's dead. It's like, what do I do? How do I get back into the TARDIS? I haven't got the key. And it's interesting because that's a sort of new spin on things. And that's, I mean, it is slightly odd how Doctor Who sort of goes off and leaves and start with no. It is a bit of a, Mr. Hartnell's not going to be throughout this story, and he sort of leaves him to it. But equally, that does help because Stephen has got no idea what's happening. So at various points, you can say, what is happening here? And then someone will say, well, in the city, and it helps the audience into it because it's not an easy piece of history to just accept or know about. So I think that's a nice bit of narrative work there.
And it really is Hartnell light, isn't it? Because he's not in too many scenes in the opening episode. He's not there in episode 2. The abbot isn't really featured too heavily in episode 3 up until the point where he's killed. And the Doctor's back in episode 4. So, you're right about Stephen having to pick up and take the action, and the story really is unfolding as a piece of drama on screen in front of us with Stephen at the helm. It is odd where you've got and it's an interesting concept for them to have come up with the idea of William playing both parts, but I would have expected to have seen Hartnell in it far more on the basis of the fact he was playing the two parts in the story. So again, it felt a little underplayed.
But we know from our previous reviews in this season that he was less and less into, they were adapting the script so there was less Hartnell, which again is a bit weird because he's got two characters, but in this, the characters don't meet, so it's okay because he's not doing two roles in that respect. He's not having to act against someone who's pretending to be him. There's only a small amount of the abbot, like you say in episode 3. It is very weird, but it is such a good showcase for Peter as Stephen to carry that story, and he does. He's right from the start. He's in the same. I don't know how much of the audience would have known about the massacre. And it's an educational piece, but the audience would have been in the same position as Stephen at the beginning, going, "What's happening? Where is he? Why is this significant?" And it's not until the Doctor comes along in episode 4 and just goes, "What's the date?" and then goes, "Oh, right, we're off." It's and then you're like, "Hang on," because Stephen doesn't have that knowledge of what's about to take place.
But then he sort of lists them, doesn't he? He does that list. He says, "Well, Nicholas," and it's just like, "Yeah, all gone, mate, all gone."
Yeah,
that's very bleak, because there isn't a lot of hope. I mean, there can't be a lot of hope. There wasn't a lot of hope in the actual event. On a slight divert, Annette Robertson's character is sort of, the thought was that she could become the assistant, so that's sort of why she's built through it, and then he just goes, go home, go lock the door kind of thing. Whereas, in honesty, if Doctor Who had taken her away, it probably wouldn't have affected the course of events. So it's a slightly lame excuse in that we can't interfere with history. You go and lock your door and hope that no one, drags you out, slaughters you and throws you in the Seine. It's a sort of odd moral moment.
I read that they actually decided that the audience wouldn't relate to her, so they decided to because that's what the original intention was, but they decided that the character and the character's background would find, I don't know whether that's because the ratings have gone down on this story or not, but they decided that the audience wouldn't necessarily relate to the character, so they decided not to take it forward.
Well, Jackie had started filming during Dalek's master plan, so time-wise, I think when they were scripting it, they obviously decided that having had the thing with Katerina that didn't quite pan out. It is the difficulty, because on one hand, I suppose they had Jamie later on, and Jamie is sort of from Neverwhere, isn't he? In that if they need him to not know what a lamp is or something, he'd be like, "What's a lamp?" Because I'm from, the Jacobite rebellion. Whereas if he just needs to flick on a light switch and not question it, nobody asks us, because he's sort of a modernized historical, isn't he? He's not come in. I mean, Katerina is full on, I'm a Trojan, and it's very much so. And the same with Anne Chaplet. She's very much from the period she's in. She's ensconced in that, and there's no way around that. And I think the thought of, if jumping ahead, if they'd landed on the Ark and it was Anne Chaplet that was there, and like, well, I've gone from.
They probably would have been freaked out by the elephant.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing. The historical are very difficult to take. It's not impossible to make it work. It's just a bit more legwork, and I think it's easier to take someone contemporary and just roll with it and say, well, her great grandfather is related, and it's all right. She didn't die, and it's all fine.
I think I think it might have been an interesting. I mean, they probably wouldn't have done this, but I sat and thought, actually, what if it was the actress who played Anne Chaplet who'd walked in as Dodo into the TARDIS, rather than it being Jackie Lane? See, just as an aside, how that would have been like almost a real.
Oh no, we would have been into like Clara Oswald thing, wouldn't we? It's just another version of the same character.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, but
I mean, Dodo's entrance is quite. You've got Stephen's gone off now. Quite rightly, he's been through this ordeal. He's had enough. He's turned around to the doctor and go, right, I'm going, and then she just runs in to say there's been an accident, and then Stephen comes in to say the police are going, and the doctor goes, right, we're off, and Stephen's like, hang on a second, you've just kidnapped this person who's just walked in.
Dodo's like a little boy. There's been an accident. A little boy's been hurt. I mean,
yeah.
Let's carry on the massacre. Little boy's been hurt, and then Dodo's like, oh well, you look a bit like my granddaughter. Come on, and the doctor. It's really weird. No one's bothered about this accident, are they? They're like, let's get out of here. And he's even worried about the police coming over the common towards the TARDIS. Like, well, just lock the door.
I mean, Stephen's already annoyed because of the number of companions that died in the master plan. What had happened in this story, he decided to leave, and then suddenly he finds himself back with the doctor kidnapping someone, leaving someone in an accident. I mean,
did Stephen go out in a flounce and cause the accident? Is he to blame for that child being injured? We need to know.
Maybe he is. Maybe that's a whole big finish waiting to happen. How Stephen caused the accident and decided it was probably safer to go back with the doctor.
Yeah, it's an odd. I mean, I suppose it's a bit like you said, you wanted more light in it and stuff. There is that moment where you go from the wood carvings, isn't it? They use for the massacre and people screaming and dying and the wood carvings. To Jackie legging it across Wimbledon Common and into the TARDIS and like, hey, up how's it going, Doctor? And all that. Accent number one.
Oh yes, the accents.
And it's a very broad northern accent for sure, isn't it? In this one scene.
But it is a sort of odd. I mean, there is a lovely. I mean, and again, that was one of Donald's very proud things because he wrote the speech, didn't he, for Hartnell to sort of say, here I am on my, and it is the first time since the show starts that he's on his own, isn't it? Because Stephen, and he sort of name checks all the assistants, and he does the cheeky Chesterton Chatterton thing. It's also quite nice. So it is a lovely speech actually. That and then I suppose you kind of have to then pick it up because you don't want people bleeding into their fish and chips, do you? You kind of got to go back next week for more fun and adventure. Please stick with us. It's not always going to be this bleak.
I mean, there was originally supposed to be, as the TARDIS materialised, Ian and Barbara were supposed to be there in the original script. They had seen the TARDIS dematerialise, and it was supposed to be, because he'd done that little sort of flashback to all the previous ones. That was supposed to happen, but it got pulled at the last minute. So
see, I don't believe for 1 second, and then I know this is a fact because it's one of those things that like, they wanted William and Jacqueline to come out. I don't believe for 1 second that either William or Jacqueline would have come to do an afternoon's filming in Wimbledon with. It wasn't the same producer, so it wasn't like Verity be like, oh, it'd be funny if you came and did this. Hartnell's not on location for it, so it's not like, oh, it'd be lovely to see Bill again. It'd literally be an afternoon on Wimbledon Common for a sort of joke, and as both of them would have to have had their BBC fee for that would have made a very expensive cameo. So I do wonder to what extent that was something when there was that script saying, wouldn't it be funny if, because we're back in present time, this happened? And then someone going, that's going to cost you £102 to get them both back, and that's more than we're paying Jackie for the week to be the new assistant. And they've gone, maybe we'll just have an uncredited extra look a bit aghast as the TARDIS takes off, and it will do the same job. And all right, then we'll go with that. It would have been lovely, and again, the trouble is, it would have been lovely, but we'd have had no telesnaps and we'd have had no visual representation of it. So, they could have been
say
there.
that they were there because they wouldn't have said anything. You could just say, "Well, actually, cut to the scene where Barbara and Ian watch the TARDIS dematerialise." That's why it's missing, because they don't want to pay them.
Don't pay the residuals back on it. So yeah, I think literally like the last 10 minutes of it do feel like it's part of a different show for some. It's almost like the transition back to next week. So I think, and we haven't got there yet, but I think when it goes back to next week, it is back to, it's a bit more light-hearted Doctor Who adventures in space and time. Whereas I think actually progressively what we've had, I mean, possibly Mission to the Unknown, into the Myth Makers, into the Dark Master, into Massacre, it has got progressively harder and a bit darker and a bit less, everyone will be all right, Doctor Who will save the day. It's been a bit more kind of like, oh, they're going to die or they're going to die, but we'll sort of save the day. And I think you can't sustain that because it's a family show after the grandstand and everyone's meant to have a light-hearted play and then, you know, watch whatever comes following. I mean, kids watching, was it Land of Giants? Lost in Space thing, was it? Lost in Space was the regional opt-out for ITV. So that I think for a kid probably in '66, you'd have gone, oh, I don't know if I want to watch this. This is like being at school on Tuesday afternoon. Let's see what's happening in Lost in Space, which is very expensive and glossy and American. Yeah.
One thing I did notice about this story that I hadn't noticed previously is that there are no episode recaps from the previous week. So you end the episode on the cliffhanger and the story just continues straight on when you come back into the episode, i.e. the next scene. So I'd never noticed that before. Not a single episode recap through the Massacre. Must in fact probably be the only time in Doctor Who history I think that might have happened in the classic series.
Were you watching the omnibus?
I'm not sure. It was 4-part. I mean, I'm not sure if they cut it out in the recon for some reason, but there's definitely no play in on the recons. There's no play in of the previous sort of cliffhanger from the previous episode.
90-minute historical recollection of slaughter for Doctor Who. Do we have any exciting facts on Doctor Who and the Massacre?
We've covered quite a lot of them actually while we've been talking. I mentioned about the real life doppelganger of the abbot. That was in 1562, so it was 10 years before this was actually happened. The massacre itself was like 10,000. I think it was like 10,000 people in Paris. I mean, all these people had gathered for this wedding, and it was this big, huge social event. And then they went and slaughtered them all. And there was something like across the country, there was like 30,000 people that were killed off. We talked about that scene where Hartnell is reflecting on the previous companions, and then there is a moment where he says, you know, maybe I should go home, but then says, no, I can't go home, which is, you know, we haven't yet got into the whole Gallifrey and all the sort of lore around that, but it's a nice little sequence. When we did Mission to the Unknown, I said that Hartnell had it written into his script that he would always be listed on the titles, because he doesn't appear in it, but he is listed as Doctor Who. But in this serial, he is listed, but as the abbot for episode 2 and 3, he's not listed as Doctor Who. So it was the first time the main, you know, he had been credited for something other than Doctor Who in the show, and he wasn't credited for Doctor Who for those 2 episodes. Paddy Russell, first female director on this story. But yeah, that was it. I mean, you talked about there was so much rewritten. But is it true that Donald Tosh only gets credited as a co-writer for the last episode?
Well, Donald was script editor for the first, credited script editor for the first 3, and the policy being you couldn't script edit and write. So then he leaves. So Jerry Davis is script editor for episode 4, which means that Donald can be credited as co-writer. It's one of those faffy kind of, I suppose it's a legality, isn't it? But so he's only co-credited for the last.
He'd changed quite a bit of it, hadn't he?
My top pop facts for Doctor Who and the Massacre, that I was delighted to discover this. All those pictures, because we don't have any footage of it. We have got lots of pictures. There's lots of pictures from production which all look gorgeous, but there's also lots of pictures of Jackie Lane on location with the TARDIS, and the TARDIS is that kind of the normal front and a really kind of dodgy sidewall that looks like a sort of, I don't know, Scouts project has been sort of included. Now the reason for that, folks, drum roll, is that the filming for her on Wimbledon location was concurrent with the studio recording for Dalek's Master Plan. So they just sent a bit of the TARDIS prop on location for Jackie to run into and use the rest of it in studio. I was thrilled to discover there was a reason why it looked so terrible on location. I just assumed that it was falling apart and they were just patching it up. But it makes more sense that you would have just sort of split the thing and kept a bit for studio, and I was thrilled by that.
It's a good fact. It did look right shonky on the pictures that we can see of it. So that with all the windows are really wrong on the side, aren't they?
Well, the other thing is the massacre didn't actually take place on St. Bartholomew's Eve.
The day after.
It was the day after. So I know you said about calling it the full title, but the full title is actually slightly historically inaccurate. But
this story also features, I think, quite a rich guest cast as well. And again, we're robbed not being able to see them actually acting on screen, but there are some very notable names in the cast list, aren't there, for this one, for the guest cast? And again, worthy of any BBC drama of the Huguenots era or whatever they might have been doing if they're doing drama historical of the week.
And of course, Annette Robertson was married to a TV's Doctor Who. Well, she was previously, before she did this, married to John Hurt for about 2 years or something. It passed through. But yeah, I think that's another little future thing there. So do we have scores for Doctor Who and the Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve? I'd love this to come out, if only just to see how they crammed that onto the side of the spine on the DVD. They would just call it the Massacre, wouldn't they? And they would be like, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
But I would want my version. I'd be like, I want a reversible cover and I want the full thing written down.
Condensed to 60%, no doubt. To get it in.
Fine. So, scores. Which one of you is going first?
Shall I go first? Then Jason,
can add half on.
Add half on. So I know we've said this many times. Without the actual visuals, it is really difficult to judge a story. And this story is so dark, and you'd hope there would be something off the screen that would somehow lift it a little bit, because it is quite grim, and it's only until the only light in this story comes at the very end when you get Dodo running into the TARDIS, but it does feel like that is a completely different tone and everything to the rest of it. It feels like that was something that was recorded and added onto the end of it because they wanted to just make sure that the new companion was in place, ready. The story itself fascinates me. I love the fact that Stephen gets more to do, and he really is prominent in this story, as Hartnell sort of takes a step back, even though he's playing the two characters. It's not one I would race to watch, though. I'd love to have it, to be able to watch. It's not a story I would go and listen to the audio of or watch a telesnap recreation. So I did give this a 6.5. I've gone fractional early.
Oh, that is early fractional.
Now, Jason usually says that the fractionals are rounded, though, doesn't he?
Yeah, I've been known to call them everything through the course of the time on this. So I think I think at this stage in the game, with some of my names, I give these scores I'm making up, I think, as I go along. Okay, The Massacre. One that I've got to be honest, I came into not having watched it a huge amount previously, as I've already said, and thinking, oh, this is going to be a bit of a slog. I'm not a big fan of the pure historicals. I remember my Reign of Terror score was really quite low. However, this is one that's well worth a reappraisal for me. And I've come out of it with a real different view. And this has gone right up the list of, I wish you could see what I could see, viewer, honestly. They are honestly trying to put me off all the time. And this one's gone right up the top of my, I want this one back. If there's ever going to be any missing episodes, Phil, big shout out. Massacre, would love that one back alongside the Myth Makers. That would be amazing. Because this one, I really actually wouldn't mind sitting down and watching the proper televised version of. Okay, so I think you've got a really, you've got a really strong cast list in here. I think the idea of the using this historical period in history, I'm a bit questionable on. I think it's a little bit too heavy, but they do make some good play of it, as we've said through the course of this. And the fact that this is the first example of the Doctor, or the actor playing the Doctor, playing two parts in the story, makes this one quite unique for its time. So a brave move. So from my point of view, it's not going to get a Reign of Terror kind of score, because I think it's much, much better than that. It's a hard watch, not easy, but if you can get past all of that, I would be giving The Massacre 6.
When he said
you were going to go 7, I honestly thought you were going to say 7.
When he said the two stories I'd like to have back would be The Massacre and the Myth Makers. Just for clarity, viewer, if anyone wants to think Jason's contrary with this, he gave the Myth Makers 5.5, and he's just given The Massacre 6.
Yeah, and what I think would happen here is that I think my score for this story would, again, like I said, for the Myth Makers, my score for this story would go up a little bit more if I could watch it as a whole piece. I think 6 is a fair score for this story. There are parts of it I find very uncomfortable to watch. But I think, it's a period of history that you can't get away from the fact that it's a dark period of history. So, yeah, I think 6 is a fair score.
I would like to say that there are stories that you scored higher that don't exist, that you wouldn't rather have back over the ones you scored lower that haven't been brought back.
I give the basis of the score on what I've sat and watched.
Look at it go. It's just...
No. I'm quite happy, quite confident with my 6.
I don't know when Nadine Dorries got that Jason Clifford mask, but it's lovely to see her on here.
96% of people would have given it a 6.
I mean, there you go. The viewer may disagree with it. Stick it in the comments, but I'm quite comfortable with 6.
Good. Which, if anyone wants to know, that's half less than James gave it.
Oh, but he pitched it right in the middle there, didn't he? Where was I going with that? No, I was always giving it a 6, irrespective of where it was.
Anyway, I'm just going to waive this just because I think you could get the money out of it. You go back on the shelf, it's fine. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I'm sort of at pains with a lot of my votes, and so in terms of I could vote what I see something as a drama, or what I see as a Doctor Who, or what I see as how I like it, and they're all sort of different iterations. If that makes sense. I would incidentally say, as a product placement here, I'm very proud of the Who Talk commentary we did for this, because it's actually surprisingly difficult to do. Normally you can do commentaries and you react to what's on screen, but we did all 4 episodes of this with just the reconstruction, and I'm very proud of that, and it's actually good that that's out there, because Donald's not with us, and it's lovely that exists, and we want to hear him talk about it. It's that. I think it's a cracking piece of drama. I think the only thing I find slightly strange is those last 10 minutes where it sort of and I get that it has to just pick it up, get you a newer system, and get you to where we've got to be next week. But it does feel kind of like the Massacre finishes about halfway through episode 4. That said, I think it is an amazing piece of drama. I would love to see visuals, because the pictures just, it looks like it would look beautiful, and I think you get so much from a lot of the performances being able to see them. I gave Doctor Who and the War of God 8.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Good score.
I'm a punchy scorer for a historical, unless it's the Reign of Terror, and then I might let it drown. Which brings Doctor Who and the Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve, or
Easy for you to say.
the easiest title there is, out on 20 and a half. Which isn't enough for it to take the lead, thanks to James's turn. We appreciate everyone's scores here, just for clarity. And we roll on to our second story, which is The Ark, which I've done a sinister voice for, but actually, I mean, oh, sorry, it's another hardback.
Hardback heaven.
What is this? Another hardback of The Ark? Oh, look, someone's even scribbled their name in that. Yeah, so The Ark isn't actually a very sinister title, to be honest with you. And I remember actually as a little time tot when I used to go to the library, I was desperately uninspired by that cover. I just remember looking at it thinking, it looks like Doctor Who in a zoo. I'm not bothered by that. I don't need that. If I'm going to read, I'll read The Invasion. That looks like a big story. That looks like Doctor Who in an adventure with a couple of antelope. And I'm not that bothered.
Doctor Who on safari.
Which is how the Radio Times would have billed it in that era, isn't it? Doctor Who goes on safari. Little bit of a write-up. So who has an intro for us, and does it start? It is 10 million years in the future, and Earth is about to plunge into the sun.
No, that's not how mine starts. So mine is a little bit more modern inspired. So mine simply says, "Stay in the TARDIS, protect the humans, save the Guardians," because what we have here is a sort of. It's an interesting one because it's in two stories, really, isn't it? You have the initial story where they arrive on the Ark. Dodo's picked up a cold from running around the common in the previous story, sneezes, and then everyone starts dying because they don't have a cure for this disease. And that's the sort of first premise of the first 2 parts. The Doctor helps them. Then they get on the TARDIS. They've dematerialized. You're sat there thinking, is this just a 2-parter? And then suddenly they rematerialize back in the Ark 700 years in the future to discover that the monoids have essentially overthrown the humans, have learned how to speak, have developed weapons, and have decided that they are going to be the ones that are going to colonize this new Earth, if you like. So then you get the second part of this story is them help the TARDIS crew helping the humans overthrow the monoids with a little bit of help from a very cheaply realized alien, the Refusians, who are invisible. Isn't that great? So you don't have to come up with any more costumes because we've got these super powerful invisible aliens. I'm sure we've seen some invisible aliens already this season. So kudos for rolling them out again. It's in the same way that you say that the cover for the hardback is a little bit uninspiring. Although this does benefit from having these 2 angles to this story, it is a little bit threatless, if you like. I enjoyed it, and it was quite straightforward to watch. But I don't know whether I wanted something a little bit more sinister or a little bit more dramatic to happen. It was like everybody got a cold, and he cured it in the first part. and then you got to the second part where they met an invisible alien who was able to help them overthrow the monoids. I don't know, but I tell you what I did like is Dodo in this. I thought really sort of fresh character. She was very sort of headstrong. I thought it kept on being these things where the doctor kept on going, I'm going to teach you how to speak proper English, and she was like, oh, yeah, whatever, old man, and then just went off and went and challenged people and said, you can't do this, you can't do that. I thought actually she came across really well in her first proper story. So yeah, I'll shut up now and let someone else speak.
I think Jackie does come in with a bright energy to it, and it's quite nice because I think she works well with Stephen quite early doors. I mean, she's mainly partnered with Hartnell, I think, for most of this, and that's quite nice. Because there's the Guardian in the second part who gives Stephen some saucy glances, and she fancies Steve. And I'll stay here. He doesn't know his way around the Ark. And Steve's like, oh yeah, you stay here. And it's all a bit like, all right, there's a bomb you got to deal with here. Can you focus on task? Yeah, it's an, I like that. That is a great cliffhanger. The second part where they've gone and they've come back, and that's really good because we discussed on the last video, I think, where we said about it being a rolling drama, and each week it could, that's clever that it looks like it's finished and they are back. The third part's got a terrible cliffhanger, hasn't it? Where it's like, how do we get back? Or we might have to stop here. All right.
Yeah, that's it. It's just like we're just gonna live here now, and that's the end of it.
The hilarious thing about the invisible refusions is that they're however million miles away from Earth. They've got a very 60s design aesthetic for their living room, haven't they? It's not terribly space age looking. It's like, oh, that's a lovely bit of ceramic pot that you've got there, and yeah, we forgive it. The mono design's lovely. Do we like the monos? And depending on how much effort the extra in the costume has gone to, you still get a bit of eye waggle on these things. I like that. It's
because it was a ping pong ball, wasn't it, in their mouths? So some of them use their tongue to move it, so it looked like it was flickering.
You've got to love their communicators in the last two episodes of this, where they flick the communicator open to talk, and then they shut the communicator after they stopped talking, so that you can tell which one is talking. I find that quite amusing.
Or when Thor realizes his doesn't move anymore and just holds his hand over it. Yeah. It's like it's stopped moving. Or hold it. No one knows. No one knows. No one noticed.
Only allowed 4 edits per recording. I'm not going to stop the recording for this.
And they do have a motion of a poor girl at a prom who hasn't worn her gown before. They're all sort of shuffling because their legs are a little bit restricted, so there's that kind of awkward booty shuffle that they've got as they're going along. And there's a couple of moments where they go down steps and stuff, and it's a bit like, oh, and the monoid's down. It's fine. You didn't fall. Yeah. You didn't fall. He's good.
And then that's yak's hair they've got on their head as well. So that, again, probably wasn't very comfortable, especially under the studio lights. I mean, God.
Yeah, it's a shame the costumes don't stand an awful lot of scrutiny if you look right up close to them. But I think the monoids as an idea come across well.
One idea.
Oh. Yeah. Yeah, because there were a couple of model effects, but again, everyone at home, I mean, it would have been a very small screen, and I think the monoids would have probably looked a lot more effective than they sort of do shuffling about. I mean, the funny thing was, because they don't speak for the first two, obviously, because the thing is that the Guardians develop the language for them and all that sort of stuff, and that's why they become bad, because they can start speaking and all that stuff. Anyway, when they do start speaking, they're camp and conspiratorial, aren't they? Don't tell him they spat. And it's like, I know, they are a little bit camp, the monoids, and that's quite funny.
And they're the worst people at planning for stuff as well, because they tell their plans to everybody else, bar the others around them. I mean, everyone they can
multiple times, in case they miss it the first time. They're like, we've hidden the bomb in the statue.
We've hidden the bomb in the statue. It's like a BBC One, sort of comedy sitcom, isn't it? It's like, don't tell them we've hidden the bomb in the statue. What, this one? Yes. Oh no.
I'm surprised they weren't winking the one eye. As they were actually telling the plan every time.
Although I don't quite get why the Refusion can just lift the statue. That's a sudden plot point that the Refusion's got humongous strength to pick it up and move it. It helps get it off the ark so it can just be blown up. But all of a sudden, because it's not like they're giants, because they fit in the landing thing.
They fit in the capsule, don't you? You see the bum print when they sit down.
And they've got little chairs to sit in, their little IKEA dinner set and all that stuff in the hallway. So they're obviously small, but humongously strong enough to lift a statue that's the size of the ark, because it is the size of the ark when it comes out of the thing. They can just do that in time to save from the bomb. And goodness, the Refusions were all quite big.
I was going to
not
say,
invisible.
It's quite weird. They say they evolved from being like humanoid creatures to these. I don't know whether they're not necessarily invisible, but sort of like these creatures that are highly evolved. And they're like, so we really wanted a bunch of humans to come and live here. We built them a city. It's like, are we just leaving the humans to be enslaved by these super beings on this new planet? Having saved them from the monoids, I'm imagining that these Refusing to yeah, let's get some humans in because they make good pets.
Because that would make for a great living setup, wouldn't it? You're there in your new accommodation. You don't know if there's a Refusian lurking around in the background, listening to everything you're
watching
saying
you through the window.
Well, to be fair, I think if a Refusion were there, they would announce it in quite a plummy stage voice that they were in the house.
There's an awful lot of BBC English in this one, isn't there? Especially the commander of the spaceship of the Ark in the first two episodes. He's particularly BBC English, isn't he?
Even on his deathbed. Oh, the doctor speaks the truth.
And we have the glory of the security kitchen, which is what TV's Toby Hadoke calls his kitchen at home. It is the security kitchen, because it is the best place to keep people under lock and key. A kitchen.
Yeah, it's one of the best prison cells we've ever seen in Doctor Who, isn't it? Let's be honest. You're locked away. You can eat yourself. You can eat yourself to death if you really want to.
Eat yourself to death.
Oh no, eat the food in the cell, in the security prison kitchen.
Oh. I don't know, you were just like, I'll eat my finger first and work my way. You said eat yourself. Yeah, I might have a foot this Sunday as a roast.
Least said. I think it's interesting because I know a lot, like Peter and a couple of others, haven't been very, they've been quite critical of Michael Emerson's direction on this. I think it's really well directed. I think he's trying new things, and there's lots of moments where he's trying something different here, and I like some of the attempts to get depth on the Refusion where the ship lands and model, but they've got he's obviously trying to get some kind of look to it, and a lot of the very high shots of the sort of the control room in the Ark, and I think a lot of praise should go to him trying these things out for this story.
So that was
Agreed, yeah.
Forced perspective is what they call it. One of those shots. So there's quite a few of that. You
mean he wasn't with a real spaceship?
But, it's nice to see something a little different, and that's exactly what he gives us throughout this. He gives us those sort of, and I love those high shots because they're big sets. They had the luxury of being in Riverside for this, so they could get the big sets here. And this is also the first one they recorded out of sync slightly as well, because they filmed some scenes for the final episode because they had the set struck for that. So it's quite an interesting way that, again, he was experimenting against what would have been the norm. And then in the last episode, he gets the nod from the BBC that his contract's no longer being renewed. So it's kind of like it's bittersweet for him in the last episode. But no, I've got to say, so far this season, he's one of the standout directors, I think, because he tries some very different things.
And that was horrid because he just got given a letter. So he wasn't even told face to face. He literally just someone came up to him and said, I've got a letter for you. And the letter was, we're not renewing your contract. and it's like, how harsh is that? It's like,
It's interesting.
carry on
also,
recording.
well, I suppose Maureen had it, didn't she? Sorry,
Yeah.
love. Going in a month. I like the fact you get actual animals that are part of it as well, because ordinarily with a lot of cheap television, I'm not saying Doctor Who's cheap, but quite often it's not the most expensive. You would have cut to a shot of an elephant in Africa or something, and it'd have been like, oh, that's, you know. But there's that moment it walks through, and it's like it's there. They touch it, and there's a sort of, you know, there are animals, you know, hired in at great expense, I would feel, and that gives it a real vibe that you know. I'm not quite sure why they've you know miniaturized certain people and not other people,
not the animals.
And why there's quite a mix of the animals. That means there's like a tiger lurking about somewhere or something, or I don't know what their thoughts were on it, but it does give it a sort of an epic vibe. And I think that if you're talking about the Ark and saving the human race and taking examples of everyone or whatever, it helps to have that visual, which again, were that we were reviewing this in the same way we had to review the Massacre, if the Ark were just the audio,
I don't think you get any of that scale, would you?
Wouldn't.
You'd have no idea how it was shot. You'd have no idea how the monoliths look when they do the, you know, you'd lose a hell of a lot of this, which helps it to go along. I think it would be a bit blander on audio.
Agree. This is a very visual story.
I love how that beginning bit with the animals allows the Stephen and Dodo relationship to sort of start to sort of develop, because you've got Dodo doing the same thing that Stephen did, where she like walked out and goes, "Oh, it's Whipsnade Zoo," and
but I found that jarring though, James, to be honest, because he went through exactly the same thing in the Time Meddler. You think he'd be a little bit more sympathetic towards her when she's having that exact same experience. You know, he doesn't like say, well, actually, it was okay because I felt like this the first time. He's not. He's quite snippy with her, I feel, in those.
He is the doctor in that scene, because he's like, you should have checked the scanner, you know, it could have been dangerous, it might have been toxic air, and she's just like, look, we're in Whipsnade, over here is the monkey bars or whatever. But it is it is, I like that little sequence, because the doctor doesn't appear for a little while. It's just the two of them, and it is like a rite of passage of, you know, the new companion to stay, especially as we didn't really see much of her in the last one. She just literally ran in to say there's been an accident, and then suddenly she's in the TARDIS, and so again, a bit like Stephen was very, at the beginning, was like, oh no, we can't be back in 1066, this must be a simulation. She again brings that sort of modern day thing of, well, we're in Whipsnade Zoo, you know, it's a very, we see this with modern day companions like Rose, who it just brings that modern day context to it of, I can't believe I'm in an ark which is 10 million years in the future. My brain is telling me that I'm in a zoo in modern day London. So I like that scene, and I think it's again shows Stephen's maturity, even though he isn't like, you know, don't worry, it'll be all okay. He is very doctory in that scene. He is very sort of like, you should have been a little bit more responsible and stop running off and everything. So, and he takes charge quite a bit in this story. He's like, I'm going to go and do this and everything. So again, his character is becoming quite, not dominant, but quite strong within the story.
It's the recurring theme, though, isn't it, for this season from here on in, really, as they start to give Hartnell a slightly easier part. So they're not necessarily, you know, putting him through quite so much week in, week out. So, you know, it's a natural evolution right up now and through the next few stories that we see, I think, this exact approach from the character of Stephen.
I also like that. I mean, the cold storyline, it's quite clever that what is just a common cold is, you know, because of how far in the future it is and how far people have evolved beyond it, that it then becomes a fatal thing. That's a very clever bit of sort of sci-fi work. I like that. You know, bizarrely with I was emailing with Jackie not long before she died, actually, and she said how is the business and how are things going, and she said, I'm sorry about the COVID thing. I should never have given the cold to the monoids. And I was just like, oh, she, you know, because people always sort of said she was a bit Greta Garbo, but she loved the Doctor Who thing, and she was just she was just a shy person. She didn't want to. She wasn't going to go on stage and do a big thing, but I just love that she made her little joke about the monoids, which showed that, you know, all those years on, she still sort of remembered it all and still had an affection. But she is a very bright thing in this, and it's interesting because you can sort of see that you know, without slating other characters, I think if we'd have had Annette come forward with this, she wouldn't have had that kind of element. She would have had to have been bewildered by it all. Whereas I don't know whether the Dodo character isn't bewildered by it all, because she's a bit more forthright, and she's very forthright. I mean, look, I know when she has a go at the monoids, because you've just given yourself away. I like that. Yes. That's quite a fun one.
She is, and she catches on to things really quickly when they're in that jungle sequence, and then sort of the Doctor says, William Hartnell says, look at it, there's no sunshine, there's no sky, and look at the walls. She just twigs these things really quickly. And like you say, she's got the ability to just challenge and sort of like say, well, I don't understand this, or why is this happening, and you shouldn't be doing this. She fits right in really quickly, and she's really sparky character. But it's so nice to see, especially as you've had this period with Stephen from the end of sort of Dalek's master plan, where he really wasn't happy. Then we had the massacre, which again we've just been talking about, was quite grim. And then you have this character who's like just walked on and is immediately making an impression. You know, is immediately lifting that relationship with, you know, with the other two characters, which I think is really, it's really good. And I think we talk about this so often in different eras of Doctor Who. You need someone who's contemporary to Earth, so that the audience can relate to them and see themselves in that. And I think she does that, you know, marvelously in this first story.
I agree. I think you're right. She is like a breath of fresh air coming in, and I do feel that we'll talk about this as we go on. I don't think that her character is necessarily well treated or well written for at times, and also we're a little bit unlucky because we don't have an awful lot of visual there. We've got some, but we haven't got a huge amount. So again, it's difficult. But no, I do rate her in this story. I think she arrives on board the TARDIS, and you know, straight away you feel like she's right to be there. It just feels right. And I don't personally see the throwback to Susan myself, but I think she's right for the TARDIS crew. I think it's great dynamic between her and Stephen. So I'm in agreement with you there, James. I think.
I mean, Susan wasn't contemporary Earth person, though, was she? So and so, although I mean, again, we've discussed Susan's character changes week to week, because sometimes she's an alien, sometimes she's a teenager, sometimes she's psychic, and all sorts of different iterations. I just think that this is, just a nice change from, you know, what we've seen up until now.
So, do we have any exotic facts on Doctor Who and the Ark?
So there's a few. So this is Roy Skelton and Michael Shard's first Doctor Who stories, who would obviously go on to be in a lot more as regulars. First credited female writer. So, but this is a little bit controversial. So Leslie Scott was credited, but it was the wife of the writer, and is only credited as a co-writer. And there's a debate about actually what was written by her, but there we go. There was quite a lot of differing stories on that one. Jackie Lane's Cockney accent. So there are points where the accent slips just slightly. But there is this whole thing where, again, Hartnell keeps saying, "I'm going to teach you how to speak properly," and she comes out with some words. But I didn't really pick up on that until I was reading about it afterwards.
I had a voicemail from her once, and that had several accents in it. So I don't know whether she generally just did different accents during speech. I don't know, or it was just that it's about Doctor Who. I'll give them a bit of Dodo.
I mean, I did read that they were going to play. They wanted her character to be Cockney, and then I think they took.
And then they changed their mind.
They took a really late decision somewhere to change it, and possibly that hadn't filtered through in all the various parts we see.
Yeah,
there's definitely a wobbly. There's definitely a wobbling going on here of the accents, and it is mixing between a couple of different dialects. I feel
because there had been a rumor that it was a last minute change. They'd said no, we can't have a Cockney accent on the show, but then you're not that far away from getting what's his name, Ben, who has a Cockney accent. So
he's a man. That's completely different. You can have a woman talking like a Cockney.
You can't have a woman with a Cockney accent. This is the first of quite a few end of Earth stories. So we've had lots of different iterations of the end of the Earth. Coming right onto more recent Doctor Who. And for example, in Dinosaurs on a Spaceship, the Silurians built an ark and filled it full of creatures to save them. We saw it in End of the World, funnily enough, with David Tennant and Billy Piper, the end of the Earth at that point. So there's
Eccleston.
Christopher Eccleston, sorry, yes. David Tennant feels like he's in everything now, so just insert his name. I'm sure he'll be in it at some point. So you have a lot of different end of Earth scenarios within Doctor Who. I like that there were some points with the incidental music which were quite creepy as well. There was sort of you were talking about the sort of direction. There's a lovely shot at the very beginning where they sort of show there's like a lizard and a bird, and they show some of the animals, and then it sort of slowly climbs up the monoid until you see the sort of face, and the incidental music is quite creepy as well in points. So I liked that. So yeah,
it's Tristram Carey, isn't it? So it's got the sounds of the sort of the early Dalek stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. I think some of those might have been true, everyone. So let's have some scores for Doctor Who and the Ark.
Okay, well, I'll go first on this one then. So I like the Ark. I think it's a good all-round story. There are several things to like particularly about it. I particularly like the direction of this. I think it's done well. There's some great ideas on show, and it feels a little bit different to some of the Doctor Who that we had around that time. I can only quote really from Dalek Master Plan and from what I can see in the Gunfighters, but you could it kind of has quite a nice sort of the director's having a good attempt here at trying to do something a little bit different, and I like that. The story itself, I like the fact that it's two-part stories, both slightly different retelling of what they're doing 700 years in the future. Kind of like the idea of that. Yes, the monoids are a little bit, don't look too closely at them, but again, they're quite a good threat. They said, I agree with you, P-Bal. I think they are a little bit camp. There's lots to like about the Ark. It's one of those stories that I've watched a few times over the years, and I kind of like it. You don't have to think too hard. It's kind of a straightforward Doctor Who story, which is kind of what I like. So all things being considered, I give the Ark a very solid 7.
James, where are you at on the Ark?
I actually agree with a lot of what Jason just said. I think for me, I love the direction. I love some of the sort of design aspects of it, because it's a huge set, and there's a lot of money gone into the production of it. Maybe not the costumes of the monoid so much, but the actual sets and the design of it, the shots that are used, again, to give that sort of sense of scale and size, and the idea that the millions of people like shrunk down to microscopic. When at the beginning where they had the trial and they said, right, we've decided we're not going to exile you or kill you, we're just going to shrink you and put you away for 700 years. I'd probably be like, yeah, all right then. So not necessarily a threat in that respect, but I think for me the only thing I felt when I was watching this, until you get to the second part, there isn't much of a peril, if you like, because the first part is basically they've got a cold, and it's a clever idea, and given what's happened in recent history, you can you see the characters wearing face masks, and we'd be quite used to that kind of thing now. But in the second part with the monoids and the fact that they've taken over, but they don't, as we've talked about, they're not a cohesive villain, if you like, because they're plotting against each other and they give their plans away so easily. And the Doctor's befriended an invisible, super powerful, creature that can pick up statues but fit into a capsule. But it is enjoyable. It's a nice, easy watch. You don't need to think about it too much. Love the split with this coming back in 700 years' time to discover that things have gone wrong. And there are so many Doctor Who stories that you wish that you knew what happened next. And so you do get that in this. So I also gave this a 7.
Was it a solid one?
Yeah, you can say that. Let's say solid 7.
I think the arc, it's one of those great sorts. So I think if you were a Doctor Who fan and someone said, "Oh, can we watch one with William Hartnell?" Then I suppose I think the Time Meddler. There's a couple that you could sort of just go, "This is fine. This is quite a good example of it. It's not the greatest example of it, but it's quite an accessible one." So I also scored Doctor Who in the arc 7.
Oh,
3 7s.
3 7s. We are all in agreement. Wow.
That doesn't happen very often.
So, does it do anything to our leaderboard? Not massively. Bottom of the rung is still Galaxy 4 on 13.5. Mission to the Unknown and the Massacre are both on 20.5. Running up on 21 points each, Mythmakers and the Ark, and the Daleks Master Plan is still out on the lead on 24. But there are still 4 stories to go. 4 stories to go. There's a lot to happen here. Thank you very much for joining me, guys.
Thank you. A pleasure as always.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely. Pleasure as always.
Thank you, everyone who's watched along. Write comments, subscribe, like, anything else. I'll set up my Amazon wish list. Get me a birthday present. I'm joking. And I'll see you all soon.